You're born in a village outside Guadalajara where the houses are made of cinder block and prayer. Your father pours concrete for a living. Your mother sells tamales from a plastic table on the corner. You learn early that the world is built by men whose names nobody remembers, for men whose names everybody knows. You study hard. You sketch buildings in the margins of your school notebooks. You get into the University of Guadalajara architecture program, class of 1980. Your mother cries. Your father says nothing, but he stands a little straighter for a week. You think this is the beginning of something. You don't realize it's the beginning of everything going wrong. You graduate with a degree and a head full of load-bearing calculations, tensile strength ratios, soil compression tables. You can design a building that stands for 100 years. But Mexico doesn't need another architect. Mexico needs cheap labor and silence. You take drafting jobs. You pour concrete like your father. You do small renovations for people who haggle your price down to nothing. By 35, you have a wife, 2 daughters, and a quiet understanding that your degree is a decoration on a wall in a rented apartment. The country doesn't care what you know. It cares what you're willing to do. The man finds you at a construction site in Zapopan. He's wearing a polo shirt and driving a truck that costs more than your apartment. He doesn't introduce himself. He says he heard you're good with soil. He says he has a project near the border. Long-term, well-funded. He names a number that would take you 3 years to earn. You ask what kind of project. He smiles like you've told a joke. Construction, he says. And that's the last honest word anyone will say to you for a very long time. They drive you to a warehouse in Tijuana's Garita de Otay district. The building is unmarked, surrounded by other warehouses. Forklifts beeping, trucks reversing, the ordinary music of commerce. Inside it smells like wet earth and diesel. There's a hole in the concrete floor, 35 feet straight down. A steel cage on an electric pulley. You look down and see fluorescent light glowing from somewhere beneath the surface. The man in the polo shirt hands you a hard hat. Your office, he says. You descend. The cage rattles against the shaft walls. At the bottom, a chamber opens into a tunnel that stretches beyond the reach of the lights. The ceiling is arched. PVC ventilation tubes run along the top like veins. A rail track is bolted to the floor. The air is warm and tastes like clay. You realize 3 things simultaneously. This tunnel crosses the border. This tunnel is worth millions. And you are no longer a free man. The crew is 17 men. Most of them are younger than you. They were picked up at bus stations, street corners, migrant gathering points. They were promised jobs, janitor work, store clerks, $75 a week. Instead, they got a hole in the ground and a man in a ski mask who explained the new terms of employment. Work 12-hour shifts, 6 in the morning to 6 at night, sleep on the warehouse floor, eat what we give you, try to leave, and your family in Oaxaca, in Chiapas, in Guerrero will receive pieces of you in a cooler. Nobody tried to leave. Your job is different from theirs. You're not digging, you're designing. You calculate the depth needed to clear the water table. You determine the arch radius that distributes 50 feet of soil pressure laterally instead of vertically. You set the laser pointer that cuts a red beam through the darkness, keeping the trajectory straight, preventing the kind of deviation that destabilizes walls and buries men alive. You engineer the drainage grade, a slight upward angle toward the north, so groundwater flows back to the Mexican side where a pump clears it. You spec the ventilation intervals. Every 80 feet, a new PVC junction. Without it, the oxygen depletes within hours and men start hallucinating before they stop breathing. You solve problems. That's what you tell yourself. When the crew hits a pocket of light and water starts pouring through the wall, you design a bypass. When the sandy layer 200 feet in threatens collapse, you order wood shoring and steel mesh reinforcement. When the pulley system jams and 4 tons of sandbags back up in the shaft, you recalibrate the motor. You are an architect. You are solving problems. You don't think about what travels through the tunnel after the last sandbag is hauled up. You don't think about the 17 men sleeping on concrete who will never see payment, who know the layout of a multi-million-dollar criminal corridor, who are, in the cartel's arithmetic, liabilities with heartbeats. 5 meters a day, 16 feet. That's the pace. 5 or 6 men at the face, chipping with electric spades and picks, filling sandbags, loading them onto the rail cart, sending them back to the shaft. The cage goes up. The bags get stacked in the warehouse or loaded onto trucks marked as construction debris. Nobody outside asks questions. In Otay Mesa, jackhammers and forklifts are background noise. You could detonate a small explosive and the neighbors would assume someone dropped a pallet. The soil here is perfect. Volcanic ash compressed into clay over millennia. Cohesive enough to hold its shape without reinforcement in most sections. Soft enough to carve with hand tools. Predictable. 2 miles west, and it turns to sand that collapses if you look at it wrong. East toward the mountains, the substrate hardens into rock that eats drill bits for breakfast. But here, in this strip of industrial borderland, the earth cooperates. You almost admire it. The geology of complicity. Months pass. The tunnel grows. 1,300 feet, 1,800, 2,000. You install the fluorescent lighting, one fixture every 10 feet, high voltage cables running the length. You bolt the rail tracks to the poured concrete floor. You oversee the hydraulic door installation at the entrance, hidden behind a false wall that slides on steel runners. On the American side, another warehouse, another hole, another cage. The tunnel is a throat connecting two countries, and you built its vocal cords. You hear things you're not supposed to hear. A phone call between the overseer and someone higher. Packages labeled with Burberry logos and cartoon characters. Not branding. Accounting codes. A shipment schedule that implies tonnage you can't quite believe. And one night, a conversation in the corner of the warehouse that freezes your blood. When it's done, take them out back. They're not talking about equipment. The tunnel breaks through on a Tuesday, the American side, Otay Mesa. The first test run sends an empty cart rattling through on the rails, and it arrives on the other side in under 4 minutes. Everyone cheers except the 17 men who dug it. They stand in a cluster near the shaft, covered in clay dust, blinking under the warehouse lights, like men pulled from a mine collapse. They were promised passage north. They were promised payment. They look at you because you're the one with the hard hat and the clipboard, the one who gave orders that weren't threats. You look away. 3 days later, Mexican federal police raid the Tijuana warehouse. Someone talked. A rival cartel, a wiretap, a road that collapsed and exposed a section, it doesn't matter. The 17 men are arrested. They're put in vans, they're taken to La Mesa prison, and here is the part that breaks every assumption you've ever had about justice. They're the lucky ones. The crew from the tunnel before yours, 23 men in a warehouse outside Agua Prieta, were found in a mass grave 30 miles into the desert. The cartel doesn't pay severance. It pays silence, and silence has only one price. You escape, not through the tunnel, through a door, a truck, a highway, a flight to Paris, California, where your name on a green card says construction, and your neighbors think you remodel kitchens. You live in a suburban house with a 2-car garage. You drive to Home Depot on Saturdays. You watch your daughters do homework at the kitchen table. And 50 feet below the border, the tunnel you built moves product worth $300 million in 6 months before it's discovered by a task force that finds 2 per year out of dozens operating. The tunnel cost $2 million to build. You were paid well. The 17 men who dug it were paid $75 a week for 5 months. $1,500 total per man. The cartel made $300 million. That's not exploitation. That's a ratio so obscene it doesn't have a name in economics. It has a name in theology. It's called damnation. You're arrested in Zapopan in 2012, upscale suburb. They find you in a house near a racetrack you once owned. You're 49 years old. You have an architecture degree, 5 code names, and a career that built marvels of engineering that no one will ever admire. They put you in Altiplano prison, maximum security, the same wing where El Chapo sleeps. And 3 years later, when he escapes through a tunnel with arched ceilings, ventilation tubes, a motorcycle on rails, and fluorescent lighting every 10 feet, you recognize the design because it's yours. Somewhere in Guadalajara, a man in a polo shirt is sitting in a truck outside a construction site, watching a young architect with a degree he can't afford to use. The offer is generous. The project is long-term. The soil near the border is perfect, and the cycle doesn't end. It just digs deeper.